Crash issue 36 brings us to Christmas of 1986 and the beginning of 1987. The cover was unusual for Crash, being mostly monochrome. Being a Christmas issue, it had to be Christmas themed, but Crash were torn, having promised a cover based on Brian Clough's football fortunes. They cleverly got round this by turning Brian Clough into Santa and creating a Victorian style Christmas scene but with the usual aliens. As was typical for a Christmas issue, Crash almost doubled the price to £1.95, even though adding only 30 more pages. There were 5 Crash smashes this month, so let's see what this Christmas issue brought. There are 2 games in 9th place with 84%. The first is Adventure from Adventure Software, a game that was later rebranded as The Surf's Tale. I could only find the cover and rebranded game, so that's what I'll show here. This is a remake of the original Colossal Cave adventure with some additional locations at the start of the game to give slightly more context. Crash were critical of the unoriginal name and felt that yet another version of Colossal Cave was unwanted. However, they did feel that more effort had been put into making this game interesting, with some thought given to object carrying through the use of your pocket, as well as modern features such as RAM saves and a get all command. On a positive note, the game is fast and responsive, with detailed location descriptions. However, the lack of any graphics are a slight letdown at this point. Perhaps the definitive Spectrum version of this classic adventure, although seeming a bit old hat by the end of 1986. Also in 9th place with 84% is Cat Trap. This game started life as a competition in the June issue of Crash to design a game. The winner was Jonathan Eggleton with this game, which had then been developed by the Design team and published by Domark. In this game you move across a landscape trying to defeat the cat men who have taken over the Earth. Crash found this to be a fast and furious game that's more than just a trek around scenery. They found the graphics slick, the characters well animated, but the sound a bit on the lame side. They didn't find it had immediate appeal, or they found it better after a bit of perseverance. This is a graphically pleasing flick-screen arcade game with adventure overtones. The landscapes are probably the best bit of the game, creating the atmosphere of the spaceport and rest of the planet well. Animation is reasonably smooth, and the sound effects are pleasant enough. My only criticism is there's not really enough game here. Shooting your way past antagonists is fun for a few goes. The way you bounce when they hit you may be slightly reminiscent of Ultimate's Underworld, but I just can't see this game having lasting appeal. Despite the variety of enemies and different weapons required for each, it just feels too samey with not enough depth. Have a go, but I wouldn't regard this as a classic. There are 2 games in 7th place with 85%. The first is They Stole a Million from Ariolasoft. This is an original approach to a game, being a kind of management simulation with strategy overtones, but being totally different to anything seen yet far on the spectrum. On this game you take the role of a criminal gang having to plan and carry out a raid on one of a selection of targets. The first part is selecting your team and buying information about your target. After this, the second part loads and you plan your raid, finally carrying it out. Crash found this to be great fun and extremely interesting to play. Although not a fast action game, they felt it was presented in a way that arcade freaks could enjoy. One reviewer found the first part slightly boring, with the masses of information to flick through, but the second part to be much more fun. Even a reviewer that didn't like strategy games found this one worthwhile. The presentation works really well on this. Although there were similar games around early in the Spectrum's life, they tend to have basic presentation. This takes a winded approach that works well in conveying the information. The second part of the game I feel could have improved on the presentation is a little confusing at first glance. Nevertheless, this is a game you can return to and improve your strategy. Maybe a little slow for arcade fans, but something new that's worth taking a look at. Next, in 7th place with 85%, is Avenger from Gremlin Graphics. This is a follow-up to The Way of the Tiger from issue 28, although a very different game being a top-down arcade action fight and collect game. Crash were initially somewhat dubious, dismissing this as yet another Gauntlet variant. However, they felt there were enough nice touches to make it worth the asking price. They particularly praised the use of colour, as well as the scrolling. They drew comparisons to Druid from the previous issue, although they found this much better. They found the animation lovely, although the controls were a bit iffy in places. The sound was good, and on the whole this was a nice fun game, but nothing special. On first playing this, I was also reminded very much of Druid from last issue, although the smoothness of this game feels highly polished. Graphically it is superb, the graphics being detailed yet colourful, with colour clash skillfully avoided. My only criticism is that the more of the screen be given to the actual playing area, but that's minor. This game feels ever so slightly underrated by Crash. It's not one I've played before, but it's superb and well worth a go. In 6th place with 86% is Qua from Melbourne House. This is a follow-up to Red Hawk from issue 29. Again you play Kevin, who can transform into superhero Red Hawk. Like the first game, this is a text adventure in the style of a comic strip. Crash were critical of the unfriendliness of this game, requiring a very precise and linear solution pathway. However, they found the game slick and the graphics well done. They found the comic strip style presentation to be the main strength of the game. For an adventure, this is quite unusual. Crash did not think that it would appeal to mainstream adventurers, especially with its limited vocabulary, although they thought that comic strip fans would enjoy it. In look and feel, this doesn't differ too much from the original Red Hawk. Like the first game, this is an original approach, and one that's especially designed to appeal to comic book fans. There's not really enough here to appeal to non-adventure fans, and this game feels even more linear than the first one. If you did enjoy the original Red Hawk and want more of the same, this certainly delivers on that. Otherwise, it'd probably be best to start with the original. In 5th place, this month's first Crash Smash with 91% is Nosferatu the Vampire from Piranha. This is an isometric 3D game in 3 parts. In the first, you play Jonathan Harker and have to search Nosferatu's castle to find some deeds and escape. In the second part, you take control of 3 characters around the town of Wismar. In part 3, you play Lucy and have to lure the Count to your house for the final conflict. Crash described this as a really good game with graphics that are detailed and originally drawn. They found the game easy to get into, although the controls sometimes unresponsive. But they liked the more complex plot and found this to be a game that would absorb you as you got into it. On the whole, they had no hesitation in recommending it to everyone. This is a fine isometric 3D arcade adventure, more in the vein of something like Fairlight than perhaps the Ultimate titles. Despite the use of the Spectrum's default character set on the main menu, the rest of the game is presented well. The rooms all create an appropriate ambience, and the action is smooth, even when there are other creatures in the same room as you. My biggest criticism is the in-game music. It's pretty awful and gets annoying very quickly, but thankfully can be turned off. Although this type of game is starting to feel overdone by this point, this is a fine example of the genre, and definitely well worth a play. In 4th place with 92% and a Crash Smash is Academy from CRL. This is the follow-up to Tor Ceti from issue 23, written by Pete Cook, who developed that game. In this, you are a trainee skimmer pilot who will need to complete 20 missions to graduate the Academy. Crash found that this game had taken the best bits of Tor Ceti and improved on them. They described the presentation as slick and the attention to detail as impressive. They felt they improved over the first game by having several smaller missions rather than one large mission. Whilst the sound was not much different from the prior game, the graphics were brilliantly rendered and the game was playable and addictive. They scored this game over 90% in every category. It's a well-presented game and one that feels sufficiently different enough from Tor Ceti to be worth playing, even if you're not familiar with the first game. The combination of typing commands whilst docked, yet going to arcade-style control keys in the main game, works well as in the previous game. Graphically this is reasonable, although not overly complex, and sound is sporadic. A worthy smash, maybe not quite as much of a classic as the first game, but worth playing nonetheless. In 3rd place with 93% is Contact Sam Cruise from Microsphere. Although not a direct follow-up to School Days from issue 11 and Back to School from issue 23, this has a somewhat similar feel to those games, although with a 1930s detective theme to it. One reviewer described this as even better than The Great Escape from last issue, with more plot, better graphics, more atmosphere and more humour. They praised the graphics and 3D effects, although they felt that the sheer number of keys took some getting used to. They found the game fun with lots of colour and attention to detail. Although given it only 88% for playability, every other category scored over 90%. Having loved School Days and Back to School so much, this was a game that remained in my mind for 40 years, even though I never played it back in the day. For me, it's a disappointment as I had such high expectations and it just doesn't quite live up to the heights of its predecessors. I'm just not keen on the way that Sam is sometimes hidden inside buildings and you can't always tell where he is. The gameplay just isn't quite as compelling as the School Days games, although the film noir detective theme was somewhat original for the Spectrum. I believe there's a good game in here somewhere, maybe I just need to give it a few more goes. Take a look, but if you're expecting something that hits the heights of School Days, you may be disappointed. In 2nd place with 94% is Jewels of Darkness, released by Rainbird, but actually being a compilation of 3 Level 9 games: Colossal Adventure, Adventure Quest, and Dungeon Adventure. Crash's biggest criticism of this compilation was the name, which made it sound like everything else. But they liked the high standard of the packaging, which came with full instructions and a novella. Even at £15 they found this to be superb value for money. For the games, they praised the stories, the strong and evocative descriptions, and the clever interlocking of puzzles and objects. They summarised this as a classic trilogy, and a collector's item for connoisseur and layman alike. They scored the game at least 92% in all categories. This is the second remake of the original Colossal Cave reviewed this month. Although this was fairly old hat by this point, Level 9 were renowned for writing quality adventures. These, although still quite basic in presentation, had improved on the original releases by adding graphics, and have an alternate versions available with no graphics but more detailed text. The graphics still seem basic and blocky, but do reasonably well in creating an atmosphere. I'm not sure this compilation should have rated in 2nd place for this month, but for adventure fans that enjoyed the earlier Level 9 games and wanted more classic fantasy adventuring, it may have been worth a purchase. If you like text adventures, give these a go. In first place with a score of 95% for the 48K version and 97% for the 128K version is Star Glider from Rainbird. This is a first-person space shooter with your mission being to destroy invading Ergon craft, of which there are 16 types. Crash described this as without doubt one of the best games to grace the Spectrum screen. They found the presentation and packaging to have been executed in a most professional manner. They praised it as the best vector graphics game to date, and a game that should take pride of place in your collection if you're a fan of shoot-em-ups or vector graphics. Although the sound was not great on the 48K version, it was far superior on the 128K version, resulting in 2% being added to the overall score. It's yet another first-person space shooter, and though it's a good bit of fun, I do struggle to see what this adds to the genre, from games like Staria and Elite and Star Strike 2. The sound is good on the 128K version and the animation is smooth, but I don't always find the controls as responsive as they could be. A perfectly fine game and undoubtedly worthy of a Crash smash, but 97% was pretty much the peak mark for Crash. I don't think it ranks as the best game ever, but for anyone who's a fan of the first-person space shooter genre, it's worth a play. There are two special mentions this month. The first is a game I have fond memories of. With 79%, this is Zub from Mastertronic. You control a small creature called Zub, and must climb a series of platforms whilst avoiding security droids to reach teleport stations, and from there transport to new planets. Your ultimate mission is to find the green eyeball of Zub. Crash was slightly more impressed by the title screens than by the game itself. They liked the mindless arcade action, although they felt there wasn't enough graphical variation from level to level. On the 48K machine the sound was dull, but the 128K version improved on this. They praised the originality and felt that it may be a game worth spending £3 on, or the one that could get laborious after a while. Scores were in the 70s and 80s with an overall score of 79%. A bit like Thrust from issue 34, this is a game that's better in my memory than it was to actually play. I can see why there was some appeal to this game. It's cheap and cheerful, a budget title that's adequate although nothing special. The title screens are excellent and even the game itself is smoothly animated enough. There's just not much to it. It can be frustrating getting to the top of the screen just to be knocked down again, and there's not really enough variety to the game to make it playable for a long time. Enjoyable for a few goes if you don't want something too taxing. Also worth mentioning is Space Harrier from Elite. This is based on the arcade machine of the same name. In this game you control a futuristic soldier who flies across the landscape with a jetpack on their back, blasting antagonists. Crash were impressed by the pace at which the game moved, with each level getting progressively faster. Compared to the arcade machine, the graphics on the Spectrum were too detailed, which tended to make them messy. They described the sound as average and the effects as mediocre. The arcade machine had impressive graphics and a hydraulic seat. Despite the Spectrum version lacking both of these, one reviewer said it may be worth considering if you like the arcade version. The scores were consistently in the 70s with an overall score of 77%. This game somewhat reminds me of a cross between Trailblazer from issue 34 and Glass all the way back from issue 18. Again, it's just a game to play when you don't want to have to think too much about things and just have a good arcade blast. It doesn't really work graphically on the Spectrum, everything tends to mush together, making it indistinct and sometimes flickery. Despite that, the pace feels exciting, and although this may not quite reach the heights of the arcade machine, I can see why this is a game that people still remember today. If you have enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to see more videos about retro computing from Logic Retro.